Right now, it's much, much more open, and there's still the AFD, who in recent polls have had over 20% of the votes.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. My name is Lisa Haseldine and I am the Spectator's assistant online editor. Today I'm joined by the journalist Constantin Eckner to discuss the latest in Germany's federal election campaign. The campaign in recent weeks has focused almost exclusively around the issue of immigration, and this in particular blew up in a heated debate and vote in the German Bundestag earlier this week. Constantin, thank you so much for joining us on Spectator TV. Angela Merkel threw this absolute bomb into the middle of the debate around immigration in Germany, and in particular chose to really strongly criticise her successor as leader of the CDU party, Friedrich Merz. I was wondering, could you take us through what that row is all about, why she felt the need to intervene now so close to the election?
So what essentially has happened is that there's no functioning majority government right now because the government fell apart. That's why there are federal elections coming up in February. And that's why it's much more doable to actually bring forward motions, even from the opposition, which the CDU are right now opposition party. And they brought forward two motions. We might not get into all the details, but one got the majority of the votes and essentially prohibits individuals from entering Germany if they don't possess any legitimate documents, e.g. passports, ID cards, whatever. That might also include, of course, legitimate asylum seekers who might have fleeing from autocratic countries and might not have passports anymore because they were taken away, or whatever happened there. So it's a broad stroke, and maybe it goes too far, it crosses a line. The thing was, the CDU and the CSU, which is the Bavarian chapter of the CDU, basically, more or less, they brought forward that motion, just I think initiating debate, maybe having some legislative success before the election. Problem was that it became quite clear that actually the AFD, Alternative for Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, would support that motion, and their votes would essentially get them over the line, provide the majority. So that's why there was a lot of heated debate about it. Friedrich Merz, the one who was leading the charge, couldn't really backtrack at some point. He just was stuck in a corner, and they just brought forward that motion in the Bundestag, the federal parliament. And yeah, it got at least one of the motions, received the majority of votes, but thanks to the Alternative for Germany votes. And that's why especially Angela Merkel, as of course previously the leading figure, not only of the Christian Democratic Party, but also of the entire country, was taking a stance against her successor, Friedrich Merz. Now, two things to consider there. First thing is that Merkel was never really fond of Merz. At certain points in time, she prepared others to succeed her, which then didn't really get through because of various things, scandals and whatsoever. Was a bit of a struggle to actually find someone who could succeed here as not only the Christian Democratic leader, but potentially as the next chancellor, which didn't happen then because Olaf Scholz became the next chancellor, the Social Democratic leader. But also, secondly, Angela Merkel, I mean, she's not like an outright proponent of like open borders or whatever, but she of course has a much more liberal stance when it comes to immigration compared to what now has been decided in the parliament.
There has actually been a lot of finger pointing around where the responsibility for the root of Germany's immigration crisis lies. So, as you pointed out, there have been some people who hold Angela Merkel responsible, Friedrich Merz among them. Do you think he has a point, or do you think, as Merkel was criticising Merz for it, he is actually the one who has sort of lost his way, sort of is devaluing the party that he leads by, in her eyes, I suppose, pandering to the far-right narrative around immigration?
I mean, both things can be true in a sense. First of all, Germany are in a bit of a predicament because they have been the most attractive destination for people coming from the Middle East, for instance, or from Western Africa. just because of the economic strength, because of the social system and a social welfare system and whatsoever. So, I mean, it's easier for other countries to maybe shut down borders or just be much more restrictive when it comes to immigration than to a country which where loads of people apply or come there and try to get in. So of course it's a bit of a different story. I think other countries have a much easier time to just deal with that. So that's the first thing, especially like historically speaking. And it's not like Germany has just been the most favorable destination for asylum seekers, but also economic immigrants since Merkel was in power. No. That goes back decades and decades. So that's the first thing. And I mean, there have been taken measures when it comes to closing down borders, or at least border controls, which are usually only temporary within the European Union, but you can apply border controls, and they have been applied. I mean, there are much more restrictive border controls now at all the German borders, especially towards the southeast. So it's not like there hasn't been done anything, but I think it's not even like that the motion that was brought forward on Wednesday and got the majority. If there would have been a different kind of voting pattern there within the federal parliament, I mean, we would have a different discussion. But the fact that actually the Alternative for Germany, for the first time ever, basically provided their votes to get something done, which can have magnificent effects on Germany as a country, is a first. And there was always a talk about the so-called firewall, Brandmauer, which basically said that, all right, there can't be any collaboration between the center-left, center-right parties and all the parties basically, and the Alternative for Germany on the federal level in the Bundestag. And now that has happened. So it will strengthen the AFD with on the upcoming elections. And also it might actually weaken the CDU, because, I mean, it's a conservative party, yes. But, and maybe some of the members are also somewhat right-leaning, but there is still kind of a red line between CDU, CSU, and Alternative for Germany. There are lots of members of the CDU who don't really not only appreciate but accept the Alternative for Germany as a democratic party.
And so, talking about this Brandmauer, this firewall, do you think then that it was the case that Friedrich Merz sort of set himself a trap by coming to rely on the votes of the AFD to get his motions on immigration through on Wednesday? Or do you think it was a case that this was a political gamble that, as you were saying, looks like it might backfire on him?
I think he walked basically into a trap, or whatever you want to call it. It's not really a trap, but I think he set himself up for walking into a trap there, because even he tried to backtrack, rhetorically at least, saying that he doesn't really appreciate support coming from the Alternative for Germany. So he tried to maneuver himself his way out of the whole situation, but it doesn't really work at this point. So that's also I think the issue if you don't really have a working coalition at this point. I mean, the Olaf Scholz and the government are still in place, but only until the date of the election and a little bit after that. And you don't really have a working coalition which would discuss such things beforehand, and then they would get a majority in the parliament, but just as a matter of process, but not really as a clear-cut, like open voting. I mean, as it is done in many different countries, right? You do these things beforehand, you get to a consensus within the coalition parties, and then something is decided, but it's more of a formal act at this point. So right now, it's more of an open door to just bring forward anything, and maybe you get the majority, which can be appreciated to some extent, I think, yes. But on the other hand, it's not really workable, especially on a federal level, with a country of over 80 million people, to just fire out some ideas and then hope you get a majority of votes in the parliament. Not really. I mean, it doesn't work really that way, to be honest. It's not really how real politics works. But on the other hand, I mean, it might also backfire for the CDU in terms of just the election results on February 23rd, because they already have lost a little bit ground in recent polls. And also after that vote on Wednesday, they again lost 1%. They are now below 30%. So doesn't really help them, because there are still a lot of people who might think that conservative politics is needed right now in Germany, but still don't accept the alternative for Germany as really a viable partner or whatever. And also, I mean, just yesterday, members of the parliament actually in the Bundestag discussed a potential, at least a process of then, how would you call it, of prohibiting the AFD, for instance. That's something that has been discussed, or at least starting the process, and then potentially prohibiting the AFD, eliminating them from the election process. And there are actually legal experts who say that actually there is ground to do that, because a party that is as aggressively fighting against the constitution can be prohibited and can be eliminated from the democratic process. There are also others who say that's not really doable, but at least, I mean, it's not like a clear-cut issue. It might actually be doable. So, but now with the AfD supporting a real political matter brought forward by a democratic party, a center-right party. Now, of course, they also establish themselves as being part of a democratic process.
Yeah, it certainly is a conundrum. I was wondering if we could also talk about Olaf Scholz and his SPD party, and how the fallout from this row and debate over immigration is impacting his party. Do you think that this could also help his chances in the polls? I mean, his criticism, as you've touched on, was that this proposal by Merz might not be constitutional sort of under German and EU law, but equally sort of the status quo as he's been campaigning on, particularly on the topic of immigration and how Germany deals with illegal migration and asylum seekers in particular, that clearly hasn't been working for him. So do you think that he will benefit from this row, or will he fall by the wayside?
If you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you'll get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
I think he might benefit to an extent, at least, because if you look at just how the voter landscape in Germany has changed over the past 3 decades, maybe. I mean, there was a time when if you voted Social Democratic, if you voted for the SPD, you were more of a left-leaning person. If you voted for the Christian Democrats, you were more of a right-leaning, conservatively leaning person. Now it's much more, it's a center-left and a center-right party, but there is kind of an open border, so to speak, between the two parties. So there are voters who are maybe one day vote for the SPD and the other day they vote for the CDU, and maybe even on the state level, on the local level, they vote differently than they vote on the federal level, depending a little bit on what the particular parties propose for each election. So he might, Olaf Scholz might actually gain a couple of votes just from people who are now, let's say, disgusted by Friedrich Merz and the CDU, to use some strong words, and then decide, no, I mean, we weren't happy with Olaf Scholz and his kind of leadership style, and there was a crisis of leadership at some point, but still he's the lesser of two evils. So we rather vote for him than for Friedrich Merz. I mean, Friedrich Merz might be an appealing conservative leader to an extent. He, of course, comes from a liberal economic background, but he's not everybody's cup of coffee, to be honest, even when it comes to his personality and the kind of way he does things, and being maybe a little bit too pushy and a little bit too aggressive at times. So, I mean, there might be people who are much more content with Olaf Scholz, who is someone who's sometimes too laid back, but he's also someone who might actually gain votes because of that. So it's very difficult. I mean, there were times in Germany where before elections you could clearly tell who was leading the race and who was losing the race. Right now, it's much, much more open. And there's still the AfD, who in recent polls have had over 20% of the votes. I mean, that's just something you have to keep in mind. So they are also a clear-cut option to a lot of people, even though they won't lead the next government.
And this row around immigration, this debate around it, the rising popularity of the AFD in this election campaign has coincided with events that have been happening in Austria, where Herbert Kickl, the leader of the far-right Freedom Party for Austria, the FPÖ, looks like he is coming very close to potentially becoming Austria's next chancellor, and seems like this has really spooked a lot of democratic politicians in Germany in particular, particularly given how popular the AfD is becoming, as you say, sort of over 20% in the polls. But nevertheless, if German politicians are looking to ban the AfD potentially from being able to run or exist as a party, surely that would be a huge mistake, regardless of what you think of the AfD from a sort of a democratic political process perspective. Surely that would also backfire on them. I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about that.
I mean, that's really also a question for legal experts and political scientists, because, I mean, there have been right-wing parties in numerous European countries being successful at recent elections. If you look at the Netherlands, France, I mean, they might not always have won the elections, but they gained a considerable number of votes. And looking at the FPÖ, historically, I mean, even 20 years ago or so, there were FPÖ members who were Landshauptmann, which is basically the regional governor. So they were elected to be regional governors. So they're much, much more established. And that's really something. It's really hard to tell if you can completely compare the AfD to FPÖ or to Marie Le Pen's party or whatever. You know, it's really not that easy. You can't just say that every right-wing party in Europe is kind of the same. No. There are vast differences. And when it comes to the AfD, to be like, from my personal experience, it's not like that every member of the AfD or every voter is like a right-wing, I don't know, an anti-democratic thinking person. No. It's not even like that. If there are grounds for eliminating the AfD, then it's based on there are some members who are not right-wing, but they are clearly walking into like Nazi anti-democratic territory. It's all about like a portion of members who are not really within the democratic realm operating. So, I mean, the AfD, if they would, I don't know, cancel out these people and just cancel their memberships, for instance, we couldn't even talk about anything like prohibiting the AfD and eliminating them from the election process. So it's much more about them and a number of members who are not really thinking democratically and who are not really accepting the current constitutional reality. So that's why, I mean, it's really hard to compare. You see that in other countries where right-wing parties are much more bourgeois and much more in the middle of the field. And even the FPÖ, from all I have witnessed in Austria, is that, yeah, there might be a few who are a little bit out there, but most of the members are right-wing, and they might have ideas people don't really accept, more from the left side of things, but not really quite the same.
And looking forward to after February the 23rd, after the date of the federal election, it will fall to whoever wins the largest portion of seats in the Bundestag, most likely the CDU still at this point, to try and form a coalition. Now, of course, off the back of everything that we've discussed, it's hardly happy families in the German Bundestag. They've all spent the past couple of weeks ripping each other apart and will probably continue to do so up until Germany goes to the polls. So I was wondering, what do you think will happen in terms of Friedrich Merz's chances of successfully forming a coalition with some of the other democratic parties, and who you think at this stage they might be?
It really depends on a few results of the smaller parties. So right now, FDP, the Liberal Party, in recent polls, they are below the 5% threshold. They are at 4% and something. Same goes for the Linke, the left party. They are below 5%. If they get in, the entire complexity of the Bundestag changes because all of a sudden they have a number of seats there. If they don't get in, it's completely different in terms of like how many seats each party then has, even though maybe the CDU one way or another comes in at 31% or so. That makes things a little bit more difficult. If the FDP actually manages to get over the 5% threshold, which is I mean, it's a pick 'em right now. You don't really know. Then, of course, they are also a viable coalition partner for the CDU. And even though FDP, they haven't really been strong in recent years, also didn't really do a good job in the government, which just folded in end of last year. Still, they would be a party that could collide with the CDU quite effortlessly. So it really depends on that. If the FDP doesn't get into the parliament, don't get any seats, and they are out of the parliament, which has happened before actually, then it might be a completely different story, and you might see CDU trying to form a government with the Green Party or with the Social Democrats. And as you said, it wouldn't be a happy family. It would be like a usual family party where sometimes people don't really like each other, but still find a way to eat some cake together, but not really on happy terms.
Constantin, thank you so much for joining me on Spectator TV. It's been fabulous to talk to you.
Thank you.